And then the next thing that strikes me about this is that we're talking about the Foreign Intelligenc Surveillance Act. There's been a lot of disinformation about what the Foreign Intelligenc Surveillance Act was intended to do and when it came about. I've heard many people, mainstream media and big names on the radio, saying that this was something that began with 9/11, that they created the FISA Act and so forth as part of the Patriot Act. Not true whatsoever. Not at all true. The FISA Act goes back to the abuses that were happening in the 1960s, that were uncovered in the 1970s with the Church Committee hearing and the Pike Committee hearing. I've mentioned this many times. I'll keep doing it because obviously there's a lot of people who are giving misinformation about where this all came from. It's important that you understand that it was way before we had the NSA whistleblowers, way before we had Ed Snowden. We had people realize that they were doing what were then literal wiretaps, and they were doing it without search warrants. And these organizations like the NSA and the CIA that were supposed to protect us from foreign dangers had turned inward on American citizens. That's why we had the FISA Act. After 2001, September 11th, it became a tool of oppression, a tool to violate the Constitution. That's what we're going to see. Stay with us. We'll be right back. I'm David Knight. FISA is not something that was created in the wake of 9/11 as part of the Patriot Act, as has been reported by some in the media. That's not true at all. As I point out, this is something that goes back to abuses in the 1960s and 70s. And understand that the FBI and these other organizations were already committing, of course, the CIA was in its infancy. Truman was going to go on to create the NSA by executive order. So that was in the 1940s, mid-40s, when he's president. He's talking about how we're trending towards a secret police and a Gestapo with the FBI under J. Edgar Hoover. Then he authorizes the NSA by executive order. And the CIA was formed after World War II as well, from the OSS. It had a charter. And it didn't take very long for these abuses to get very, very bad. And after the Red Scare and the McCarthyism was over in the 1950s, people were saying, wait a minute, they were supposed to protect us. The NSA and the CIA were supposed to protect us from these foreign enemies, and yet they have turned on the American people. And they already had by the 1960s in spades. So much so that you had the church hearings in the Senate, and in the House you had the Pike hearings. When the Pike Committee brought the NSA in and said, we'd like to see your charter. We don't have a charter. We got an executive order. Well, I'd like to see that executive. We're not going to show it to you. I'm not going to even show you the authorization. You congressmen are nothing. We're going to talk about the deep state. You want to talk about the shadow government and who runs that? These people are so arrogant that they won't even talk to the committees that are supposedly their oversight for the people, our representatives who are supposed to oversee these things. And that was the 1970s. And they took everybody's attention off of what the real issue was, spying on the American people and being out of control. They took everybody's mind off of that by showing the heart attack gun and talking about CIA assassinations and so forth. But the real issue was, and they did not give this up. You know, they put Helms out and he eventually was killed. They replaced him with George H.W. Bush and he rebuilt the CIA capabilities, undid the damage and so forth. But the real family jewels they didn't give away, and that was what they were doing to the American people. And in order to stop that, you had the Foreign Intelligenc Surveillance Act, which created the Foreign Intelligenc Surveillance Court, which is now the subject of all this. That's where the F comes from. It's about foreign. It's like, yeah, we want you to look at the bad guys abroad, but not on Americans. But that's not what they do. And now they have gotten, and we've been talking about this for a long time. We had whistleblowers from the NSA in the wake of the Patriot Act, in the wake of 9/11, saying they have already created, this is prior to, it was ready to roll out by the time they had 9/11. They were looking for an excuse. They had already created the mechanism, the software that they'd paid a fortune for, that had been created outside of the NSA. Good guys like William Binney and Thomas Drake and others had created internal software that would have allowed them to monitor enemies of America that were foreign without revealing identities of Americans. But that's not what they wanted. What they really wanted was the identity of Americans. And so William Binney and others at the NSA became whistleblowers. Nobody paid any attention to that. And then we got reminded of it again in 2013 by Ed Snowden. Nothing happened really of any substance to reform any of this stuff. And then we had massive abuses with all this stuff through the election, and we just had the Congress keep all this stuff quiet until they could reauthorize Section 702 and loosen the restrictions that had already been violated by the NSA and this entire surveillance apparatus. So the FISA court is only one part of this. We can look at this and we can say, well, you know, it's a troubling breakdown of legal processes established to protect the American people from abuses related to the FISA process. Or we could say, what made you think that by creating a secret star chamber court, you wouldn't get this kind of result? Seriously? You didn't know this? Are you that stupid or are you that complicit? And I think you know what the answer is. That's a rhetorical question. We know that they're complicit in this. And so, to me, it raises concerns about the legitimacy and the legality of the FBI and the Department of Justice. But it also raises a lot of questions that this doesn't really address as to why we're even going through this FISA process. It was meant to restrict their surveillance of Americans, but it's been used as a tool to surveil Americans with this whole process. The thing that is key about all this is that it has become so brazen, so overt. What the shadow government used to do in the shadows, they now do on MSNBC and CNN. And they do it without embarrassment.